He stood there, alone, silent, exhausted. The courtroom was packed. On one side, high-priced lawyers in designer suits. On the other, a man in a wrinkled shirt holding nothing but a photo of his daughter. The judge shuffled papers. The company's CEO leaned back, smug, thinking this would be just another easy win. Then the single dad spoke, just one sentence. 7 words. That's all. And the judge slowly lifted her eyes, and looked directly at the CEO. But what did he say? Why did it hit so hard? And what secret was the company so desperate to keep buried? Stick around, because by the end of this story, you'll see how truth has a way of cracking even the toughest walls, and how one man, with nothing left to lose, brought a corporation to its knees. Before we go deeper, I need to ask you something. Do you believe justice still matters today? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happens in this video will challenge what you think about right and wrong. If you're someone who roots for the underdog, someone who believes ordinary people can still stand up and win, smash that like button right now. And seriously, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in his shoes? Hit subscribe so you don't miss powerful stories like this, because the one you're about to hear? It's real. And it's unforgettable. Let's rewind. 6 months earlier, James, our single dad, was just trying to survive. He was working brutal double shifts at a local shipping warehouse. No family nearby, no backup plan. He wasn't chasing dreams, he was just trying to keep the lights on and food in the fridge for his 6-year-old daughter, Mia. Weekends were short. Money was tight. And the only thing holding him together was the little girl who still believed her dad was a hero. But that belief would be tested. One rainy Thursday night, James got a call. Mia had collapsed at school. What started as a routine checkup spiraled into hospital visits, second opinions, and terrifying diagnoses. It didn't make sense. Mia had always been healthy. Then, a pattern emerged. James began digging. And what he found? It wasn't just shocking, it was infuriating. A silent danger connected to his workplace. A chemical linked to health risks. A memo from the company that acknowledged it. And a decision, from someone high up, to ignore it completely. James wasn't supposed to see that memo. And he definitely wasn't supposed to say anything. But he did. He filed a complaint. Got ignored. Filed again. And that's when the retaliation started, reduced hours, strange reports, intimidation tactics. And when his daughter's health deteriorated further, he had no choice. He sued. Now he was here, in court. Outnumbered. Outfunded. But far from powerless. Because what he said next, just one sentence, would change everything. James Miller wasn't born a fighter. He never liked conflict. He was the guy who said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. The kind of man who held his tongue just to keep the peace. But life has a way of cornering even the quietest people until they have no choice but to speak up. James was 38, a warehouse floor manager, and a full-time single dad. After the divorce, he got primary custody of Mia, his daughter, his light, his reason for every hard day. He gave up nights out, hobbies, and even weekends to make sure she had what she needed. Birthday parties, bedtime stories, macaroni art taped to the fridge, he showed up every time. But raising a child alone while working 60+ hours a week isn't just hard, it's a constant fight against exhaustion, bills, and doubt. The warehouse wasn't glamorous. It was grueling work. Forklifts, cold air, heavy lifting, and strict deadlines. But James never complained. Not even when safety protocols got skipped. Not even when he started noticing a strange smell in the loading dock. A chemical odor. Faint but always there. Then came the coughs. First his. Then Mia's. Doctors said it was allergies. Stress. Maybe asthma. But nothing they prescribed seemed to work. And Mia was always tired. Always pale. James started paying closer attention. To Mia's symptoms. To the workplace. To the shipments coming in. And slowly, a pattern formed. That's when he found the document. It wasn't meant to be public. A safety memo buried deep in an email thread. It outlined exposure risks to a particular solvent used in the cleaning products they stored. Risks especially dangerous for children and immune-compromised individuals. James froze. That chemical? It was stored near his workstation for over a year. The odor matched exactly. And every day, he'd go home, covered in microscopic traces of it, to hug his daughter. He reported it. Politely. Quietly. At first. The company brushed it off. We're in full compliance, they said. There's no cause for concern. But James knew better. And when he pushed again, the tone shifted. Suddenly, his shift hours were cut. A performance review was mysteriously downgraded. Whispers started among coworkers. He was being silenced. Mia's health declined. Her immune system weakened. More tests. More specialists. No clear answers. James was out of time, and out of patience. He stopped sleeping. Stopped smiling. But never stopped fighting. That's when he found a lawyer. A small firm. Nothing fancy. No billboard ads. But they listened. They believed him. They said, let's make this public. Let's make it right. And they helped him file the lawsuit that would bring him face to face with the company's CEO, in a courtroom filled with pressure, power, and secrets waiting to explode. The courtroom was a fortress of silence, interrupted only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of papers. On the plaintiff's side, James sat flanked by two modest attorneys, visibly underdressed compared to the sleek, dark-suited army representing the corporation. The CEO didn't attend the early days of the trial. He didn't have to. The company had a legal team with more combined experience than James had dollars in his bank account. Their goal was simple: outmaneuver, outlast, outspend. They believed no one would care about a single father's health complaints, especially if they could drown the case in enough jargon and paperwork. Opening statements were clinical. The corporation's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Braxton, spoke like he was narrating a science textbook. He framed James's claims as unfounded assumptions, his evidence as circumstantial at best, and the safety memo taken out of context. He called it a misunderstanding. A miscommunication. Said there was no conclusive link between the product stored and the daughter's condition. He reminded the court that the company followed all applicable federal safety guidelines and had passed multiple independent inspections. Then came James's turn. His lawyer, a young woman named Sarah Delaney, stood with a quiet fire in her voice. She didn't start with chemicals or laws. She started with Mia. A photo of her, 6 years old, hooked up to an 4, smiling through tired eyes, was submitted as evidence. This case, she said, is about responsibility. About the decisions a company made when no one was watching. And about the people those decisions harmed. Sarah outlined the timeline: when the shipments started, where they were stored, when James began reporting concerns. She played a voicemail James had left for HR, his voice shaky, pleading for answers after Mia's 3rd hospitalization. The judge listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes. James didn't speak during these early sessions. He sat still, hands folded, face unreadable. But inside, he was boiling. Watching corporate experts argue about exposure limits while his daughter couldn't run without gasping for air, it felt surreal. Like the truth didn't matter. The company's next move was brutal. They subpoenaed Mia's medical records. Brought in independent doctors to suggest alternative diagnoses. Blamed genetics, diet, even school conditions. One expert even implied Mia's health issues might stem from James's poor parenting choices. He clenched his fists under the table. But he didn't speak. Because he knew his moment would come. Meanwhile, Sarah kept digging. They discovered that the safety memo wasn't isolated. It was part of a longer email thread, including a reply from a high-level executive who acknowledged the risk and instructed employees to avoid drawing attention to it. That thread would become critical. But the defense wasn't finished. They filed a motion to suppress the emails, calling them privileged communication. It failed. Then they attacked Sarah's credentials, suggesting she was too inexperienced to handle a case of this magnitude. Still, she pressed on. Witnesses were called. A former warehouse worker testified anonymously, stating he too had reported the same chemical smell, and was mysteriously transferred the following week. Patterns were forming. The judge's demeanor shifted. What began as a standard corporate liability case now felt different. More human. More dangerous for the company. And still, James said nothing. He just waited. For the moment when 7 words would silence the room. It was day 6 of the trial when everything shifted. The air in the courtroom was heavier than usual. The CEO had finally shown up, seated in the gallery with his legal advisors. He wore a tailored navy suit and a cold, neutral expression, composed, detached. Like this was just another meeting in a long day of meetings. Sarah was finishing cross-examining one of the company's environmental compliance officers. It wasn't going well for them. The witness had stumbled over dates and contradicted internal emails. Still, Braxton tried to smooth it over during redirect. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah requested James to take the stand. The courtroom paused. Even the CEO looked up. James stood slowly, walked to the witness box, and was sworn in. For the first time, everyone's eyes were on him. No buffer. No lawyers. Just James, father, worker, whistleblower, facing a billion-dollar machine. Sarah approached gently. Her tone softened. James, what made you decide to take this public? He took a breath. His voice cracked a little, but it was steady. She was getting worse. Nothing was helping. And when I found that memo, I realized someone knew. They knew, and they did nothing. The room was silent. Then Sarah asked, if the CEO were sitting right here, what would you say to him? All eyes shifted. Even the judge leaned slightly forward. James turned his head. Locked eyes with the CEO across the room. And then, calmly, clearly, he said, would you let your kid breathe that air? The sentence hung in the room like smoke. No one spoke. Not the judge. Not the jury. Not the CEO. Sarah didn't need to say another word. That was it. The CEO blinked. His jaw tightened. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face: guilt? Shame? Fear? The court stenographer stopped typing for a beat. It was the kind of sentence that cuts through legalese, through loopholes, through padded defenses. A question that didn't need an answer, because everyone already knew it. The judge asked James if he had anything else to say. He shook his head. No, ma'am. That's all. Sarah thanked him. He stepped down. The gallery remained hushed. Later that day, courtroom sketch artists captured the moment, the CEO's expression, James's calm defiance. News outlets picked it up. Twitter exploded. TikToks were made. Reddit threads analyzed every frame. The 7 words went viral. They were painted on protest signs. Printed on t-shirts. Shared in stories by other parents, other workers who had been ignored or silenced. People started digging deeper into the company. Old lawsuits resurfaced. A pattern of negligence began to emerge. James's sentence became a rallying cry, not just for his case, but for anyone who'd ever been dismissed by someone in power. Inside the courtroom, the shift was palpable. Jurors began leaning forward more. The judge's tone grew sharper with the defense. Sarah walked taller. And Braxton? He stopped smirking. James didn't say anything else that day. He didn't need to. In those 7 words, he had said everything. The courtroom felt different the next morning. There was no official announcement, no change in the schedule, but everyone sensed it. A shift. The kind that doesn't show up in transcripts but ripples through body language, tone, and silence. Judge Marlene Alvarez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, entered with a more deliberate pace. She didn't glance at her notes as usual. Instead, she scanned the room, taking a long look at the defense table. Then, her eyes landed on James. "Let's proceed," she said curtly. The first order of business was a review of the internal emails, specifically, the thread that proved the company was warned about the chemical dangers and chose not to act. Braxton attempted to file another objection, this time on the grounds of misinterpretation of corporate intent. Judge Alvarez cut him off mid-sentence. "Counselor, intent is not a shield for negligence." Overruled. It was the first time the defense visibly recoiled. Sarah seized the momentum. She submitted additional employee statements, anonymous but verified, that described ignored complaints, unusual illnesses among staff, and quiet terminations of those who raised concerns. One employee even mentioned that upper management had joked about keeping the PR team busy. The judge didn't react outwardly. But her questions became more pointed. When was this protocol revised? Why wasn't the hazardous material moved sooner? Why were concerns dismissed without a formal investigation? Each question sliced through the defense's carefully constructed narrative. And each time Braxton responded, his tone was just a little more uncertain. The CEO sat still in the gallery, his face unreadable, but his hand occasionally balled into a fist. Then came the pivotal moment. Sarah asked the court to permit the playing of a deposition video, taken before the trial, of a former logistics manager. In it, the manager stated clearly, "We knew about the risk. I brought it up. I was told, don't make noise unless you want to be replaced." The judge watched the video in silence. When it ended, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low but firm. "I want the record to show that this court finds the statements in this deposition both credible and alarming." The room tensed. Braxton didn't speak. He knew better. Judge Alvarez turned to James briefly. Just a glance, but it said everything. Respect. Recognition. And then she looked at the CEO. For the first time, her expression shifted. From impartial to cold. Piercing. That look didn't go unnoticed. One of the jurors scribbled something furiously on their notepad. The courtroom gallery sat still, breath held, like everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be quoted for years. The balance of power had shifted. And suddenly, the company's walls didn't feel so bulletproof anymore. From the moment the judge's gaze locked on the CEO, something in the room fractured. The polished veneer of control the corporation had worn so well began to slip. The defense team convened in whispers more frequently. Braxton's tone, once smooth and unbothered, now carried a slight edge. Objections became more desperate. The CEO stopped attending in person. Too much heat. But the fire had already caught. Sarah pressed forward. She subpoenaed maintenance logs, safety inspection records, internal chat transcripts. One thread from a company group chat revealed an employee joking, "Hope no one finds out we're storing poison next to the coffee machines." It wasn't just bad optics, it was devastating. Public interest exploded. Journalists lined up for seats in the gallery. Activists began holding signs outside the courthouse. Local news ran nightly updates. And online, people were asking the same thing: how deep does this go? The company issued a bland PR statement about valuing health and transparency, but it only poured gasoline on the fire. Comments flooded their social media pages. Stockholders demanded answers. Whispers of executive resignations started to circulate. Inside the courtroom, jurors took notes with sharper focus. They no longer looked at James with sympathy, they looked at him with something stronger: belief. Trust. Sarah introduced Mia's pediatrician to the stand. A soft-spoken woman, visibly shaken by the ordeal. She was exposed to something. "We ran every test. We ruled out every common cause. What remained was this chronic, unexplained inflammation, consistent with chemical exposure. She paused. Looked directly at the jury. She didn't deserve this. James wiped his eyes quietly. Braxton tried one final tactic, casting doubt on James's motives. He suggested the lawsuit was financially motivated. That perhaps the emotional testimony had swayed attention from the lack of direct scientific evidence. It backfired. Sarah rebutted with records showing James had turned down 3 separate out-of-court settlements. He wasn't in it for money, he wanted the truth on the record. Then came the janitor. Elderly, hunched, but sharp. He took the stand and told the court, "I used to clean around that loading dock every night. I remember how it smelled. I complained. Twice. My supervisor told me, spray some bleach, move along. Next week, they cut my hours." It was the final nail. The pattern was undeniable. The company hadn't made a single mistake, it had followed a playbook of silence, intimidation, and cover-up. The judge began drafting jury instructions. Outside, the media storm intensified. Evening news ran clips of courtroom sketches. Hashtags spread like wildfire. College students painted murals. One mother wrote in a viral post, "James didn't just speak for his daughter, he spoke for mine, too." Influencers shared the story. Celebrities tweeted support. A local artist designed a poster that read, "Would you let your kid breathe that air?" And across the city, it appeared taped on windows, pinned to bulletin boards, even stenciled onto sidewalks. The trial wasn't just about one girl anymore. It had become a symbol of what happens when ordinary people are ignored for profit. And James? He didn't say much during these final days. But he didn't need to. Everyone was listening now. The courtroom was packed. Not just with legal teams and media, but with everyday people, warehouse workers, teachers, nurses, even strangers who had followed the case from their phones and felt like they knew James. Everyone was waiting for the same thing, the verdict. James sat in the front row, shoulders stiff, eyes on the jury. Sarah was beside him, silently tapping her pen against her folder. Across the aisle, Braxton's posture was still confident, but his eyes told a different story. The CEO wasn't present. His seat remained empty. The judge entered. She wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood. Nervous. Paper trembling slightly in his hand. "We have, Your Honor." The clerk took the paper, handed it to the judge. A beat of silence. Then she read, "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, James Miller." A second of stillness. And then, release. Gasps. Tears. Applause that the judge quickly quieted, but not before it echoed across the chamber. James didn't move at first. He just stared ahead, stunned, as if waiting for someone to tell him it was a mistake. Sarah leaned over. "You did it." He looked at her, then lowered his head and exhaled. For the first time in years, his shoulders dropped, not from defeat, but from relief. The court awarded damages, not just compensation for Mia's medical expenses, but punitive damages meant to send a message. The amount was staggering. Reporters scribbled furiously. Camera shutters clicked. But for James, the number didn't matter. What mattered was this: they believed him. They saw him. And most importantly, they believed her. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was waiting. Cheers erupted as James emerged. Someone handed him a microphone. He shook his head gently and passed it to Sarah. "I'm not the one who needs a mic," he said. She spoke loud enough through all of this. Sarah addressed the press briefly, then turned the attention back to James, who lifted a photo of Mia for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is who we fight for." In the following weeks, the company's reputation unraveled. 2 executives resigned. Investigations were launched. A congressional inquiry was proposed. The story trended for days. Talk shows debated corporate ethics. Editorials praised James's courage. Even late-night hosts referenced the trial. A documentary crew reached out to cover the full story. Mia's health, while still fragile, began improving with better treatment and a cleaner home. And James? He went back to work, not in a warehouse, but as an advocate. Speaking at schools, parent groups, and safety panels about corporate accountability and environmental exposure. He never saw himself as a hero. But in the eyes of millions, that's exactly what he became. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a flash of glory. It comes quietly, in a tired father's voice, in a question that cuts deeper than data, in a courtroom where truth finally gets heard. James didn't set out to change anything. He just wanted his daughter to be safe. But in doing so, he reminded the world that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to stay silent. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He didn't have a team of experts behind him. What he had was a reason. And sometimes, that's enough. The quote, "Would you let your kid breathe that air?" is more than a viral moment. It's a mirror. It forces us to look at what we're willing to ignore until it hits home. Behind every policy is a person. Behind every ignored warning is a name. Behind every case like this, there's someone like James, fighting not for revenge, but for protection, for acknowledgement, for change. And what this case proved is something we all need to remember: your voice matters, even when you're alone. Especially when you're alone. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, do something. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part hit you the hardest. Was it the courtroom moment? The sentence? The aftermath? Tap that like button to support stories that deserve to be heard. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. We bring real stories that go beyond headlines and remind us what really matters. You never know who's watching. You never know who needs to hear this. So share this video. Start a conversation. Because the more we speak up, the more likely someone listens. And maybe next time, justice won't take quite so long. Thanks for watching.